Hello, I'm Pastor Horace Douty in Lexington, Virginia, and each Sunday I bring you a video of a meditation based on the Bible. If you enjoy these videos, I encourage you to click on Horace Douty YouTube, then like, then subscribe, and then finally click on the little bell icon which will remind you when the video is up, and share these with your friends and your neighbors, and I appreciate it. Today, the lesson is for Easter Sunday, and the title is, I'm Going Fishing. Those disciples were filled with excitement and hope. A few days earlier, they had witnessed the worst nightmare imaginable. The horror made them run like scared rabbits. But suddenly things changed. Women had found the tomb empty. The shining angel had said clearly, Jesus is not here. He is risen. Tell the disciples he will meet them in Galilee. And so they went immediately in the radiant hope of actually seeing their master alive again. But the days went by and Jesus did not come. Each evening those disciples would tell themselves, this is the last day, he'll come tomorrow. But tomorrow came and the sunshine lit the waters, smoke rose from the village chimneys, people went about their business, and yet no one came in sight, having the scars of the nails upon him. Their thoughts were full of him, which made it harder. They remembered earlier days when life was good and when there was no shadow of a cross. There in the rural solitude, life flowed on as usual. Most of those villagers had not even heard of the crucifixion away there in Jerusalem. The restless disciples felt their hopes grow dim. Their hearts sank lower with every passing day. You know the feeling. You have times when the Lord seems far away. Even in church, your prayers feel useless, and the Bible loses its vitality. Your tears come closer to the surface. You are not the first. Look at those poor disciples. Their story should be a comfort to you. In their misery, they did not realize that Jesus was near, somehow watching them all the time. Peter could no longer tolerate the waiting, and he finally said on that evening, I'm going fishing. Now, your mind may conjure up that big disciple heading toward a secluded mountain stream with his fly rod, but that is the wrong picture. Peter was a commercial fisherman. His heavy boat lay on the beach where he had abandoned it a few months ago, fully equipped. It was time to return to the real world, where a man could test his muscles against salt spray and bulky rope nets. The rest of them went too, with nothing better to do. They pushed off and spent the entire night sweeping nets through the Sea of Galilee. They thought they were alone, yet all the time, there on the distant beach was the master they thought they had lost. Jesus watched them. He knew the future of the world was in that boat. In an agony of affection, he kept his distance. They would need to shift and survive without him. Think about it. If Jesus had stayed with them, they would never have spread the gospel across the world. They would simply have depended on him to do it all. Do not misjudge the Lord when he seems so far away. When your net is empty and your heart is heavy, he is watching and loving you. He may be training you, conditioning you, just as he was doing that night. Out of their despair, those men came into full manhood, and through them, the church was born, and you are aware of it today. The story suggests that when God seems far off, duty remains. Your work can keep you going. For Peter, idleness was torture. There were many things Peter could not do. He was not a scholar. He was not a farmer, not a herdsman. But one thing he knew how to do, and do well, he could haul in fish. He went back to Galilee expecting to resume the role of disciple after a glad reunion with his master, but that didn't happen. Yet there was work to do, and Peter resolved to do it. His aching heart remembered too clearly the crowing of a rooster. Standing there as he was, watching Jesus in shackles, and he had with an oath denied knowing his master. But here we see Peter at his best. Although waiting to see his Lord as promised, he did not stand idly. With quiet resolution, Peter went back to work. Now don't miss that lesson. There is never a time when you cannot offer some useful service. It may be small. To respond in another's time of need is difficult enough when the sun is shining and the birds are singing and your heart is light. It's harder still in the black of night. But Peter pulled it off, despite his anxiety and his heavy heart. Those unhappy men leaned into the labor, toiling through the entire night. By dawn, their common effort proved to be nothing more than useless. But after the dawn, the pathway became music and peace and joy. There is something heroic in the persistence of those disciples through the dark of that weary night. Time after time they cast those heavy nets. The ropes were drawn and the nets came up empty every time. They worked on while the lights on shore winked out, and only the night hawks kept them company. At dawn they were still at it, bone weary, disappointed. They had come to Galilee to meet a man. He was not there. They then set out to catch fish, and the fish were not there. Nothing was working. They were failures at everything until they heard a distant call, shouting instructions from the shore. Make one final cast on the other side of the boat. They did, and they hauled in a record load of fish. And curiously, the Holy Bible gives us details about that catch. After they recognized it was Jesus on shore with breakfast cooking and waiting, Peter was still interested in what was in the net. So he left the face of his Lord and walked down to the beach and counted fish. And we know how many there were. 153. Peter counted fish. Now, Jesus did not come back to these men while they were idly waiting and watching. He came after a night of weary, ordinary labor. And it may be the same for you. You will not always remain on the lofty mountaintop. You will not feel like singing all the time. You will find your task wearisome and your faith diminished. You may spend days when no one applauds or appreciates what you do. With such unpromising times, remember this story and take heart. Find a task, large or small, and get on with it. Don't dwell on your failures. Peter certainly knew and remembered his own guilt. His sin was ever before him. He had failed his Lord far more dramatically than you have or ever will. But through strenuous physical labor, Peter was able to set aside the misery of the past. He worked all night until finally there came the morning light, and on the nearby shore stood Jesus, his Master and his Lord. And never forget the last promise that Jesus made to him and to you. Lo, I am with you always, even to the very end of the ages. Amen.